بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن شاء الله محاضرتنا اليوم راح تكون عن liners and bases and the concept of bulb protection. Liners and bases are materials placed between the dentine or bulb and the restoration to provide bulb protection or bulb response. In the adjacent picture, you can see that we have the calcium hydroxide and resin modified glass ionomer sealing material placed between the demineralized dentine and the restorative materials. So those two materials represent a type of liner and a base under this restoration. Now our aim is to protect the bulb and have some bulbar response. Now we need to protect the bulb from different stimuli. For example, the chemicals present in some materials, and they have some residual reactants. For example, composite, you remember that composite consists of monomers and they enter in the polymerization reaction. Some of those monomers will not enter in the reaction and they will be called residual reactants. So you need to protect the bulb from those unreacted monomers. You don't want those monomers to enter toward the bulb and make some problems. Also, if you have micro leakage around the restoration, some of the oral fluid may penetrate and leak under leaky restoration and causing some problem to the bulb. That's why chemical protection of the bulb is very important using the liners and bases. For electric protection, sometimes when we place new amalgam restoration and there is an opposing old restoration that is different in the same constituent of our amalgam, or sometimes we have like another type of gold, another type of metal restoration like gold, there will be some reaction between those two opposing restoration. This reaction will generate some electrical current. We call it galvanic shock, and it will make some problem to the bulb and the patient will start feeling some pain. كمثال على هاي الحالة، إذا بتتذكروا في مادة العلوم كان في إشي عنا اسمه الخلايا الجلفانية، هو تفاعل تأكسد واختزال بيؤدي إلى أن نحول الطاقة الكيميائية في بعض المعادن لطاقة كهربائية. فهذا نفس الإشي بيصير هون، عندك حشوتين، واحدة فضة لما يعض المريض راح يكون في مقابل إلها حشوة تانية، إما نوع تاني من الفضة أو مثلا حشوة ذهب، فبصير في عندك تفاعل كيميائي بينتج عنه شحنات كهربائية راح تعمل أذى للعصب تبع السن. Also, we need to protect the bulb against thermal stimuli. Thermal stimuli come from metallic restoration because they have thermal conductivity. Now, amalgam restoration, for example, has a high thermal conductivity, so they might make some problem or transmit the hot and cold stimuli from the oral cavity toward the bulb. The liner and bases should be materials that have low thermal conductivity to protect the bulb. Also, composite restoration have low thermal conductivity. That's why they are considered good insulator and they will prevent any thermal stimuli to enter toward the bulb. Finally, we need to protect the bulb against mechanical stimuli. Now, if you have a deep cavity preparation and we have a small amount of remaining dentine, we need to protect this remaining dentine from the pressure of, for example, condensing a new amalgam restoration. So the base and liner in this case will provide some mechanical protection against the disruption of the thin dentine left behind in the after cavity preparation. And finally, we place those materials to have some bulb response, like relieve some inflammation in the bulb and sometimes facilitate dental bridging. When we have bulb exposure, for example, we need to encourage the dentine formation at this area. So the protective needs vary depending on the extent and location of the preparation and the restorative material that we will be using at the end. Now, the single most important factor in protecting the bulb from insult is actually the remaining dentine thickness. We call it RDT, and this is the amount of dentine or the depth of the amount of dentine remaining between the depth of the cavity and the bulb. So conservation of the remaining tooth structure is more important to bulbal health than is replacement of lost tooth structure with a cavity, liner, and base. So when you do your cavity, be as conservative as possible because the dentine is better than liner and bases. Don't remove too much of sound tooth structure. As much as you leave from the dentine, it will protect the bulb better than liner and bases that we are using in the clinic. There's many studies compare between the dentine and the liner and bases, and they found that the greatest impact on bulb occur when the remaining dentine thickness is no more than 0.25 to 0.3 millimeter. And in those cases, we need to use the liners and bases to add more protection against stimuli to the bulb. The studies show that 0.5 millimeter thickness of dentine is able to reduce the effect of toxic substance on the bulb by 75%, while 1 millimeter thickness can reduce more than 90% of those stimuli toward the bulb. And this emphasizes the importance of the remaining dentine thickness. As I said before, as much as you conserve of tooth structure is better than using the liner and bases to protect the bulb. Now let's understand why it's important to use liners and bases in the dentine. As you remember in your histology lectures, when we look at the dentine near the dentine enamel junction, the tubule density and diameter are small, as you see in the photograph or the scanning electron micrograph. In A, you can see that the tubule is very small and there is a lot of intertubular dentine. However, if you look at B, this is the dentine near the bulb. You can see that there is very large opening of dentinal tubules and there is high density of those dentinal tubules. Now what does this mean? This means that deeper dentine that is close to the bulb are more permeable because both the diameter and the density of dentinal tubules have increased. This permeability issue magnifies the importance of using liner and bases in deep cavity preparation because we are very close to the bulb. The dentine is permeable because of the diameter and density of dentinal tubules. Now I want you to concentrate on this slide because we will use it again to explain the hydrodynamic theory that is well accepted today to explain the bane or the bulbal bane and sensitivity. Now let's move to speak about bulbal bane and sensitivity. There is many causes for bulbal bane. The first one is the increased intrabulbal pressure on nerve ending, secondary to an inflammatory response, and this is the mechanism that happen because of bacterial invasion. I think most of you took lectures about reversible and irreversible bulbitis, and this is related to inflammatory response of the bulbal tissue toward the bacterial invasion from deep carious lesions. The other reason is thermal sensitivity, and this in cases of absence of inflammation, as it happens in post-operative restorative treatment or when we have sound teeth with hypersensitive reaction to certain stimuli. Now, thermal sensitivity has been explained in the past by an old theory called theory of thermal shock. And this theory states that sensitivity is the result of direct thermal shock to the bulb via temperature change transferred from the oral cavity through the restorative material, especially when the remaining dentine is thin. And this is exactly like what we speak about thermal conductivity of the restoration. Amalgam has high thermal conductivity, and in the past they were thinking that the change in temperature in the oral cavity can be transmitted through the amalgam to the deep bulbal area. And the solution for this problem is to place liner and base under in the deep cavity preparation under amalgam, and those materials should have low thermal conductivity. Now, in case of using composite restoration, according to this theory, composite has low thermal conductivity. There is no need to use any base or liner under composite restoration because they are self-insulating the bulb. بالعربية بتنص هاي النظرية على أنه الحرارة بتنتقل من السوائل اللي بنتناولها عن طريق الفم عن طريق الحشوات الفضة باتجاه عصب السن، فبالتالي بتعمل وجع وبصير المريض يحس زي وجع مفاجئ نتيجة شرب الأشياء الباردة أو الأشياء الساخنة. والناقل بيكون هو الحشوة الفضة اللي بتتكون من معادن مع الزئبق. بس هاي النظرية مش كتير صحيحة، لأنه كتير في دراسات وجدت إنه الألم بعد وضع حشوات الفضة كتير أقل من الألم بعد وضع حشوات الكومبوزيت. So it's very interesting to see that post-operative pain after placing new amalgam is less than post-operative pain after placing composite restoration. So this magnifies that the thermal conductivity alone is not an explanation of thermal sensitivity. That's why we have a new theory to explain the post-operative teeth sensitivity after placing restoration. We call it the theory of PULP hydrodynamic. And it states that temperature sensitivity is based on bulbal hydrodynamic. Now, if you look at this schematic view, you can see that most restoration have a gap between the wall of the preparation and the restorative material that allow the slow outward movement of dentinal fluid to the outside. You see that there is small space between the restorative material, and look at the arrow. The movement of the fluid come from the bulb to the outside, and it passes between the restorative material and the dentinal tubules. Now, if we have any thermal stimuli, like cold or hot drinks, those will provoke a sudden movement of the fluid through the dentinal tubules, either outward or inward movement. And this will provoke some pain because it will stimulate the nerve supply present in the bulb. يعني هاي النظرية بتنص على أنه الألم الناتج في الأسنان نتيجة شرب السوائل الساخنة أو الباردة يعتمد على حركة السوائل داخل الأنابيب الشعرية الموجودة في طبقة العاج اللي هي dentinal tubules. Now, to understand this better, let's look at the following schematic view. If you look at 446 schematic view, you can see that we have dentinal tubules, and those dentinal tubules, they are covered with a smear layer. This smear layer is very thin. However, it covers most of the dentinal tubules after we prepare the cavity, but not all of them. It produces some degree of sealing to the dentinal tubules. However, it's 25 to 30% porous. Now let's look at the 447 schematic view. The schematic view in the lower part of the slide. It shows two dentinal tubules. One is covered with a smear layer that provides some protection. However, the other one is open dentinal tubules. Now, if we look at the physics of the fluid flow through this open dentinal tubules, as you see in the physics law, the fluid flow equal diameter to the power of 4 multiplied by 2 pi multiplied by delta B, which is the difference in pressure. This means that the fluid flow is proportional to the fourth power of the diameter of the dentinal tubule. Also, it's proportional to the difference in pressure between outside pressure and the pressure inside the bulb. Also, from the law, you can see the fluid flow has inverse relation with the viscosity of the fluid inside the dentinal tubules and the length of the dentinal tubule. So what does this mean? This means that the fluid flow in the deep dentine, we have in the deep dentine large diameter. So the diameter is large, and the fluid flow will be proportionally higher in deeper dentine than superficial dentine. So when we have a very deep cavity, the diameter of the dentinal tubules is large, so the fluid flow will be higher in deeper dentine. Also, the length of the dentinal tubules in deeper dentine is small compared with superficial dentine. So you can measure that the depth or the length of the dentinal tubules from the bulb to the bottom of the cavity. So in deep cavities, we have low L length of dentinal tubules and we have high D. So the fluid flow will be multiplied many times and the movement will be very large compared with a superficial cavity preparation. يعني بالعربي القانون الفيزيائي لحركة السوائل في الأنابيب الشعرية الموجودة في منطقة العاج اللي هم الدنتينال تيوبيولز تساوي الدايمتر أو قطر الدنتينال تيوبيولز للقوة الرابعة ضرب 2 باي وهذا عدد ثابت ضرب الفرق بالضغط ما بين داخل العصب وخارج العصب وبرضه هذا تقريبا ثابت تقسيم لزوجة السائل الموجود في الدنتينال تيوبيولز هو عادة بيكون قريب للسوائل قريب للمي مضروب في اللينث اللي هو الطول تبع الدنتينال تيوب. فبالتالي لما يكون عندنا الكافيتي preparation is very deep بيكون في عندنا زيادة لقطر الدنتينال تيوبيولز ونقص في طول الدنتينال تيوبيولز فبالتالي رح يتضاعف معنا كمية السائل اللي بنتقل داخل الأنابيب الشعرية الموجودة في العاج أو الدنتينال تيوبيولز. Now if we apply some mathematic or using this fluid flow physics if we add some mathematical or if we do some mathematical calculation using this fluid flow physical law, if for example we decrease the diameter by half, then half to the power of 4, we will have 16-fold reduction in flow through the dentinal tubules. يعني إذا قدرنا نقلل القطر تبع الدنتينال تيوبيولز للنص رح نقدر نقلل حركة السوائل بمقدار 16 مرة عن الوضع السابق. إذا أنا قدرت أقلل حركة السوائل داخل الدنتينال تيوبيولز رح أقدر أقلل شعور الألم اللي بحس فيه المريض بس يشرب إشي بارد أو حلو أو حار. Sorry. Now let's see some other explanation for this theory. Now again, in this schematic view, it shows you that any stimuli like air evaporation, cold, heat, tactile pressure, all those stimuli can cause the normal slow fluid movement to become more rapid, which cause displacement of the odontoblast bodies, as you see in this picture. And the nerve ending that is close to the odontoblast, they will be deformed and this will interpreted as a pain for the patient. Now cold stimuli will lead to the movement of the fluid to the outside, from the bulb to the outside, and this will lead to the movement of the odontoblasts away inside the dentinal tubules. And if you look at the histological section, you can see that some of the odontoblasts have been aspirated inside the dentinal tubules. And this is related to the application of air blast, like any evaporation, anything that will lead to the evaporation of the dentinal tubules. So the dentinal tubules will be aspirated away inside the dentinal tubules, and then afterward it will die. Now for hot drinks, they will lead to the movement of fluid from outside to the inside of the bulb, and this will lead to the movement of the odontoblast more toward or inside the bulb, and this also will lead to deformation of the nerve ending and also will be interpreted as pain for the patient. However, the hot stimuli is less common in the oral cavity and they are not that effectively will affect the odontoblast like the cold or evaporation stimuli. Another schematic view also show that anything that makes desiccation or dehydration will lead to the movement of the cell body of the odontoblast inside the dentinal tubules to the outside and provoke the pain. Also some solution, dehydrating solution like hyperosmotic sucrose, for example, the patient will complain if they eat anything sweet, they will feel pain and sensitivity in their teeth. And this is also explained by the same hydrodynamic theory. Sweet food will lead to the movement or sudden movement of fluid from the bulb to the outside, and this will provoke pain. Also, some hyperosmotic concentration or minerals like calcium chloride, it present in some drinks and sport drinks. Also, when some people drink it, they will have some pain because those electrolyte would also make more fluid movement from the bulb to the outside through the dentinal tubules, and this will also provoke pain for the patient. So again, to summarize what we speak about, hydrodynamic theory is the most acceptable theory to explain the teeth sensitivity. It states that the movement or hydrodynamic movement of a fluid through the dentinal tubules, either to the outside or to the inside, will lead to deformation of the nerve ending inside the bulb, leading to the feel of pain that the patient has. So the theory of bulbal hydrodynamic has gained general acceptance in recent years and has changed the direction of restorative procedures away from thermal insulation that depend on the thermal shock theory and toward the dentinal sealing. Thus, there is increased emphasis on the integrity of the interface between the restorative material and the prepared teeth. If you look at this schematic view, we speak about the space between the restorative material and the dentinal tubules. So the theory states if we can seal this small space between the restorative material and the dentinal tubules, we will be able to decrease the fluid flow through the dentinal tubules, and therefore we can decrease the pain felt by the patient. Sealing the open dentinal tubules will protect from tooth sensitivity and bacterial invasion that will cause secondary caries. Now let's move on to speak about the type of material that we will use to seal the open dentinal tubules. We have different liner and bases. In literature, we have some source of confusion about those materials. We have different terms: varnishes, sealers, liner, and bases. So we will try to minimize the confusion in this lecture, inshallah. Let's speak first about cavity sealers. Cavity sealers, we have two categories. We have the varnishes and the adhesive sealers. They provide a protective coating to the walls of the prepared cavity, and they act like a barrier to leakage at the interface of the restorative material and the walls of the cavity. Now about varnishes, those are resin coating of minimal thickness between 2 to 5 micron. Usually they apply to the cavity walls that are near the bulb. The ingredient, they consist of cobalt or other resin, 10%. They are dissolved in 90% of volatile non-aqueous solvent like ether, alcohol, or acetone. They usually will produce a thin film on drying after the drying of the solvent. And usually the solvent will dry in 8 to 10 seconds without any air assistance. Those materials, because they are resin, you remember resins are hydrophobic materials. So if you want enough thickness of those materials, you should apply it more than one time. because the dentine is hydrophilic and those resin are hydrophobic, so you need to apply it many times to form this thin layer under restoration. Varnishes has commonly been used under amalgam restoration and before the cementation of indirect restoration using zinc phosphate cement. So it's an old material used under amalgam. It's not used under composite resin. Now, varnishes will be dissolved at the end. However, it's used to fill the gap at the amalgam tooth interface until corrosion products formed from the amalgam, and those corrosion products will take the space created by the varnishes, and it will have or make better seal than the varnish itself. Now, those materials are capable of reducing dentine permeability and decrease the microleakage for up to 4 to 6 months. And by this time, corrosion product will take the protection rule from varnishes. However, their use has diminished in recent years, and we have new materials that has better physical properties, better interaction with dentine, seal better the dentinal tubules. Recently they are usually using gluma desensitizers or G5 desensitizers under amalgam. Now, those new sealers, contain both HEMA and glutaraldehyde and are very effective sealing agent for dentine. So they will seal the dentine better than varnishes. That's why they are used under amalgam nowadays. Now, in a clinic, if you have a cavity preparation that need to use something to seal the dentinal tubules under amalgam and you don't have those new materials, then you need to use the varnishes. Maybe in our clinic we have varnish, we still use varnish. However, in your practice in the future, it's better to use gluma desensitizers and G5 desensitizers because they are effectively sealing the dentine compared with varnishes. Now, as a homework for everybody, I want you to go to the internet, search for the application step for gluma desensitizer and G5 desensitizer and know how they are applied to the dentine and what are the steps. Now, the other type of sealer is the adhesive sealers. Those include adhesive bonding system, resin loading agent, and also glass ionomer loading cement. We will speak about adhesive bonding systems and resin loading cements in another lecture, and we have spoke about glass ionomer loading cements in another one. Those sealers, they adhere to the tooth structure. For example, glass ionomer, we speak about the chemical adhesion of the tooth structure, and for the adhesive bonding systems and resin loading cements, those will adhere by micromechanical retention, and we will explain them later on. So the difference between varnishes and adhesive sealers, that varnishes and gluma and G5 desensitizers, they are not adhesively bonded to the structure. However, the adhesive sealer, they are adhesively bonding either with micromechanical or chemical interaction or chemical bonds. Now, other than sealers, we have the liners. Liners are cement or resin coating of minimal thickness. Usually they are less than 0.5 millimeter and usually applied only to the dentin cavity walls to achieve certain goals. The first one is like a physical barrier to bacteria and their products, also to provide a therapeutic effect such as antibacterial action or bulbal anodyne effect. They also contribute initial electrical insulation and generate some thermal protection. Now, when we should use liners, there's many indications for using liners. First, we use them in bulbally extended metallic restoration under amalgam that are not well bonded to the structure. As you remember, amalgam is retained by mechanical retention. It doesn't bond to the tooth structure. That's why we need to use liner material underneath it if the cavity is moderately to deep in the depth. Sorry. Also in cast gold or any other indirect restoration, we usually use liner or need to use liners. Also, as a stress breaker under insulating restoration, as you remember, composite is a material that has a good or low thermal conductivity. We don't need to use the lining material underneath the composite to seal the dentina tubules because the bonding agent present with composite will seal. However, those material they are will work like a stress breaker under composite. They will decrease or help in stress breaking for the polymerization shrinkage happening in composite restoration. Also, when we bond to the deep dentine or the dentine on roots, the bonding is difficult, and we will speak about that in later lectures. That's why some material like resin modified glass ionomers, they bond better to the dentine in the deep cavities and also on root surfaces. That's why we use those material, the glass ionomers, under composite as a stress breaker, and we consider them as liners. Now let's speak about the types of liners present in the clinic. One of the old material, the eugenol, it's a phenolic material or compound. It has the phenol group, and also it has an acid group, the OH group. This material produces palliative or obtundant action on the pulp when used in low concentration. They alleviate discomfort resulting from mild to moderate pulp inflammation. However, high concentration can be irritating. That's why we are using in clinic only the low concentration to alleviate any discomfort. Several cements, bases, and liners result from the reaction between zinc oxide and eugenol. So eugenol used with zinc oxide in many materials. In liners, small amount of eugenol is released over a period of several days, and this small amount will lead to the action of alleviating pain. They are not used under composite because they affect the polymerization of the composite material. So if you will use or you have eugenol in the clinic, use it under amalgam restoration if it's indicated to use a liner. If we look at the setting reaction of zinc oxide eugenol, it's exactly like what we speak about in glass ionomer restoration. This is acid-base reaction. You can see that the eugenol with the phenolic group and the OH group is reacting with the zinc oxide. Now the zinc has two positive charges, so they are able to connect two molecules of eugenol together. You see that zinc oxide will interact with the oxygen from one molecule of eugenol and also with another oxygen from another molecule of eugenol, leading to cross-linking. And this is exactly the same reaction happen in glass ionomers. So this is an acid-base reaction leading to the cross-linking of many eugenol groups through the zinc ions. After setting of the material, there will be a small amount of eugenol in the set material. This small amount will make the action of alleviating the pain. Now the second lining material we will speak about is calcium hydroxide, and this is very common material to use. Those material based on the reaction between calcium ions from calcium hydroxide particle with a phenolic moiety. It's the same or very close to eugenol, so it's a compound that has phenol group. They are formulated to undergo a chemical setting reaction. The same, it's an acid-base reaction, and this will lead to a minor amount of calcium hydroxide to be released from the liner, exactly in the same way that eugenol has set. The same reaction happened with calcium hydroxide. It's used in the deepest portion of the preparation or when the bulb exposure is suspected. This material came like two-base system. We mix the equal amount of those two materials together to have a homogeneous color. Then we apply it to the area of interest. The chemical reaction I told you is exactly like zinc oxide eugenol reaction. It's acid-base reaction between calcium hydroxide from calcium ion from calcium hydroxide and the zinc oxide present in the other molecule. Those materials have high pH, so they are antibacterial material. They encourage dentinal bridging. That's why we use them a lot if we have pulp exposure. For a process called or a procedure called bulb capping, direct bulb capping. I think you will take about this in other lectures. So it's the material, this material is very commonly used when we have bulb exposure because it encourages dentinal bridging, and usually reparative dentine formation is assisted rather than stimulated. It assists the reparative dentine formation because of its antibacterial action because of high pH. This high pH will reduce or eliminate the inflammatory effect of bacteria and their byproduct on the bulb and encourage the reparative dentine formation. Also, they might release some growth factors from dentine, and this will assist in bulb healing. That's why if you have a bulb exposure in a clean, non-symptomatic cavity, it's good to use calcium hydroxide as a direct bulb capping material. Nowadays, we have other materials like MTA and biodentine. Maybe they have better properties than calcium hydroxide, but still calcium hydroxide is cheaper material and present in any dental clinic. That's why we use it in direct bulb capping until today. Now, the problem with those materials, they degrade severely over a long period of time. That's why if you will apply them to the deepest area of the cavity toward the bulb. Don't apply them on the walls. Also, the unfavorable physical properties restrict their application to the smallest area that would suffice to aid the formation of reparative dentine when a known or suspected bulb exposure exists. So, if you suspect that you have bulb exposure, or if you know that you are very close to the bulb, you can use calcium hydroxide. Other than that, you don't need to use calcium hydroxide. Nowadays, to improve the physical properties, they have introduced what's called one base system of calcium hydroxide. They reinforce the calcium hydroxide with a resin part like HEMA, and this is exactly like the resin modified glass ionomer cement. We have the resin modified calcium hydroxide, one base system. It's light cured, visible light cured calcium hydroxide. However, this will restrict the amount of calcium hydroxide present in the material. So if we need the calcium hydroxide to support the reparative dentine formation, there will be a few or a small amount of those calcium hydroxide present, and the pH will not be increased to the required level. So those material has a better physical properties. However, they have less calcium hydroxide release, which might affect the medical properties of those materials. Again, if you suspect that you have a bulb exposure or you are very close to the bulb, I advise you to use the two-base system of calcium hydroxide. Don't use the one-base system because we are in need of the medical properties of those materials. We need to encourage the dentine bridging by the presence of high pH. Now, the third liner material we will speak about is glass ionomers, and we speak about those materials in a separate lecture. And we say that we have four major types. The conventional glass ionomer and resin modified glass ionomer are the most commonly used as liners and bases. Compomers and the metal reinforced glass ionomer are rarely used as liners and bases. So please refer to the previous lecture to learn about those materials. So the current status that newer liners place less emphasis on bulk medication and more on chemical protection by sealing, adhesion, and mechanical protection, according to the hydrodynamic theory that we speak about. Sealing is the most important property, and if you can use the ceramic or polymeric materials, they provide excellent thermal insulation compared with metallic restoration like amalgam. Now the last materials we speak about is the bases. Those are materials used to replace missing dentine, used for bulk buildup and or for blocking out undercut in preparation for indirect restoration. Those are cement bases and they are typically thicker than liner materials. They usually used in 1 to 2 millimeter. Now, they are used to provide thermal or chemical protection to the pulp, supplement mechanical support for the restoration by distributing the stresses from the restoration across the underlying dentine surfaces. Now, this mechanical support provides resistance against disruption of the thin dentine layer over the pulp in deep cavities during condensation of amalgam or cementation of indirect restoration. So, if you have very large or very deep restoration and very deep cavity preparation, and you have a very thin remaining dentin thickness, you need to place amalgam restoration. It's better to support the amalgam restoration with a base material that has the thickness of 1 to 2 millimeters. So when you condense the amalgam, you will not make any disruption of the thin dentin layer present in the cavity. Now, what are the materials that we can use for base? In the past, they were using zinc phosphate cement and resin reinforced zinc oxide eugenol, and that was in 1960s. Then polycarboxylate was introduced and become very popular because it bond also to the tooth structure. Later, they start using glass ionomer cements, and the resin modified glass ionomer nowadays is the best material to use as a base. It provides chemical adhesion with the tooth structure. It has good mechanical strength and it rapidly achieves its strength. So if you look at this table, you can see that zinc phosphate, if you look at the compressive strength in this table, you can see that zinc phosphate has 77 megapascal, the polycarboxylate has 100, glass ionomer has 120, and finally resin modified glass ionomer has 200 megapascal. So if we speak or take the mechanical properties as a factor to use a material, resin modified is the better or the best material nowadays to use it because it has the best compressive strength. Also, it bonds chemically to the tooth structure. It's user friendly because it's light cured material supported by acid-base reaction. And you can refer to the previous lecture about resin modified glass ionomer. So the best base material nowadays to use is resin modified glass ionomer. However, if you don't have it in hand in a clinic, then you can use either normal or conventional glass ionomer or polycarboxylate or polyphosphate. All of them have been used previously. Now let's speak about clinical consideration for using liners and bases. The need for specific type of liner and base depend on the remaining dentin thickness, the consideration of the adhesive material, and the type of restorative material that you will be using. You can use various liners and bases combined in a single preparation. The ultimate goal for us is to have a minimal of 2 mm of tooth structure or a combination of tooth structure base and liner between the restorative material and the pulp. So if we don't have 2 mm of remaining dentin thickness, we need to create this 2 mm with a combination of liners and bases. Now, as a summary for the currently used protocols in dental clinic, for amalgam restoration, if you use amalgam to restore your cavity, if the cavity is shallow, then you need just to apply varnish or the G5 or Gluma desensitizer, then you will restore the cavity with amalgam as you know in your dental lab. If the amalgam cavity preparation is moderately deep, then you need to use resin modified glass ionomer liner. Then you will apply the varnish or G5 or Gluma above the resin modified glass ionomer and restore the cavity with amalgam. Now, if we have a deep cavity preparation, we have two choices. Either the bulb is involved, and in this case we will do a direct bulb cap. We will use calcium hydroxide in the area of exposure. Other than calcium hydroxide, I say you can use MTA or biodentine. Then you will cover the calcium hydroxide or any direct bulb capping material with resin modified glass ionomer, and then you will restore your cavity with varnish and gluma and then amalgam. If the cavity doesn't have bulb involvement, like in indirect bulb capping, then we will use resin modified glass ionomer material without calcium hydroxide, and then we will apply the varnish or gluma, and then we will restore it with amalgam. Now, if we are using composite restoration, in shallow cavities, usually we just apply the bonding agent that come with the composite. In the moderately deep cavity, we can use resin-modified glass ionomer cement liner, then bonding agent and the composite. And as you remember before, we speak about the resin-modified glass ionomer, and we say that it's the best material under composite because it has a resin part, and this resin part is exactly or close in chemical constituent of composite, so it can interact chemically with the composite. That's why it's the best material to use under composite. Now, if you don't have the resin modified glass ionomer, then you will use either the conventional glass ionomer. In deep cavities, again, if you have bulb involvement, try to apply any bulb capping material, calcium hydroxide or MTA or biodentine, and then cover it with resin modified glass ionomer, and then you will apply your composite normally. If you don't have bulb involvement, just apply resin modified glass ionomer liner and then your composite with the bonding agent. Now again, if you don't have resin modified glass ionomer in the clinic, you can use the conventional glass ionomer, or sometimes we use a flowable composite. Flowable composite is the same like composite, but the filler part is less, so they have flowing properties. They are not thick like the normal restorative composite that we have. And finally, we'll speak about the survival of the liners and bases. Varnishes, as we say, they are relatively thin, brittle, may provide chemical protection for a couple of days to weeks. Then they will be replaced by the corrosion product from amalgam. Bonding agent can survive for many years. Liners and bases may be sufficiently intact to limit the extent of tooth-free preparation to only the outline necessary to remove the old restoration. However, it may be good practice to remove all liners and bases during the restoration procedure as long-term change cannot well characterized. So if you will redo a restoration, it's better to remove the old restoration with all the liner and bases underneath it. And calcium hydroxide finally may continue to dissolve and may lose 10 to 30% of their volume over 10 or more years. Again, if you replace old restoration, try to remove all the old lining and basing materials. Finally, as a summary, we need to know that there is still a need for bases and liners, even in the adhesive era that we have. Bases are primarily used to block out undercuts, and the liners should be used in a thin film, no greater than 0.5 millimeter thick. Try to seal, we are depending on the sealing abilities of liners and bases to the dentition tubules and prevent the movement of fluid according to hydrodynamic theory. Resin modified glass ionomer are used with deep caries prior to bonding because they bond to deep dentine with available because bonding to deep dentine with available dentin bonding agent is not predictable, and we will speak about that next time inshallah. Cavity sealer like gluma and G5 should always used under amalgam to decrease the sensitivity. Now those are our references. They are present in the section for this week. I hope that everybody will take a look at them, and if you have any question, please send me an email.